This is the Jayhawker Podcast.
And we are presented, as always, by the University of Kansas Health System, by Black & Veatch, and by the next generation 10G network, only from Xfinity. The future starts now. We have a special guest today, and it's great because we also, if you know this show after we've done it for a few times now, at the end of the show, we have our call of the game, and that is presented by the President Hotel, which is the place to be if you're going to the Big 12 championships or anything downtown. But of course, we know that's coming right around the corner, and so that's the spot to be. It's the best hotel right downtown, close to T-Mobile and all that. And we always do our call of the game. It features our guest today. I'm really excited for this. We're going to talk to an old buddy of mine, a guy that I worked with for a long time, way back when I worked at the Jayhawk radio network, and who is doing his dream job. And I think that most of us can at least identify with having a childhood dream, but I don't know how many of us can actually say we are living our childhood dream. And my buddy Brian Hanni, the voice of the Kansas Jayhawks, for what is it now? Is it about 10 years now, Brian?
It's year 9, actually. They've gone by fast.
Year number 9. That is hard to believe because it does go so fast. Brian, the voice of the Jayhawks, joins us. How are you, buddy? Man, it's great to see you.
Great to see you, Nate. Always fun to talk with you, especially in a setting like this. I was thinking about it when you invited me. We had so much fun over the years. I think it was 8 years working together on the women's basketball broadcast. And I learned so much from this guy about play-by-play, about life, about climbing within the career. You gave me dating advice. You helped me get better music taste by the end of it. We drive up and down the Big 12 region back then going to these women's games. And I learned so much from Nate Bukaty on these road trips in the car, just staring straight ahead and talking life. So it's fun to be on with you, buddy, and so excited for your success, not just nationally, but internationally. And it's great to see you doing awesome things with this podcast too.
Well, you started right where I was going to get to at some point. We're going to talk about some of those long drives up and down I-35 that you and I made together. You probably had to listen to more unsolicited advice from me than you ever wanted during that time. Listen to Nate Bukaty pontificate while we're in the car together. But we had a lot of fun together. I was going to ask you how many years it was that you and I did the women's games together, because for me, it was 14 years total. Yep. But my first year was with Jennifer Jackson, who was a great player at Kansas. By the way, you Jayhawk fans, if you don't know about Jennifer Jackson, she was a tremendous point guard during the some of the best years of the Marion Washington era. And she did the first year with me. And I'm trying to remember who else I might have worked with, but then it was me and you for most of that time. So it was close to a decade, and it was a lot of fun. But I want to go back because, and by the way, what I was thinking when we decided to do this podcast, your job and when I do play-by-play, our job is to tell everyone else's story, right? We're not really the story. The story are the participants, in your case, the student athletes that you're trying to put them up on a pedestal and let all the KU fans out there get to know them. But so I get to tell your story a little bit, have you tell your story. So I mentioned dream job. I think you and I grew up Jayhawk fans, thinking that Bob Davis and Max Falkenstein were kind of heroic type figures. I know that was the case for me. What about you? Like, take me back to the early days, young Brian Hanni. When did you become such a Jayhawk, and when did that dream of, hey, maybe someday being the play-by-play announcer for Kansas really start to pop into your head?
Well, thanks for asking. It's fun to tell that story because I grew up in a family that was Jayhawks through and through, but they never said you have to go to Kansas. But after, 15 years of driving over for college football Saturdays at Memorial Stadium with my dad and my grandpa, and 15 years of going to most of the men's basketball home games. There are a few late night big Mondays that mom wouldn't allow me to, miss my bedtime for. But by that point, it's kind of ingrained in you. And there's no other place you want to go than the University of Kansas. You've seen the traditions, you've experienced game day. You understand that this place is set apart and is a cut above when it comes to a lot of things. And so it was a pretty easy choice for me. I was pretty good in school and could have gone a number of places, but I only sent out one application, and that was to the University of Kansas. And while my dad did not put any pressure on me to go here, I know he was super excited once I did. But I was fortunate, man. You and I both studied under Tom Hedrick,
Yep.
the man who literally authored the book, The Art of Sportscasting. And so while there were other schools in the region, one of which to the east of us and the other up near Chicago and Northwestern that had great reputations and all that for doing what we do, the fact that Tom Hedrick was at KU and the year his book came out was actually my freshman year. So I remember driving the car for him on a Baker Wildcats football road trip while he proofread his book. And that was kind of neat to get to hear him read it out loud and, get a first glimpse or listen in on the great knowledge and lessons within. But as I get set to actually start teaching a play-by-play class at KU next semester, which is a big, exciting thing in my life, guess what the curriculum is going to be? Assignment number one is buying that book from Tom Hedrick that was written all these years ago. But weren't we blessed to study under a guy like that and then, be a part of a culture of sportscasters at the time? A young Brian Hanni got to learn from the Nate Bukatys and Bob Fescoes of the world. And obviously Kevin Harlan tops every list of famous KU grads, but there was a pretty good culture and lineage already built of great play-by-play students that had come through the University of Kansas. And that obviously attracted me here too.
So it's great. So I'm trying to remember if I think you came into school right after I had graduated, if I have that math, because I remember as a senior, or actually when I was out of school, I think it was Tom calling me and telling me, hey, I've got this young broadcaster, Brian Hanni, you got to meet him. He's going to be one of the best students that I've ever had. And he was a fan of yours like right away. And what's funny is when you got there, he was proofreading the book. When I was in school, he was writing the book.
Sure.
And that was a lot of, we did those same drives to Baker where he was Tom Hedrick. For those who don't know, but when he was the professor at KU, he was a legendary play-by-play man himself, did the first Super Bowl, by the way, among many other things. But he was doing the Baker Wildcat, which I believe is his alma mater, football games. And if you were a student that wanted to get into broadcasting on Friday nights or Saturday nights when everybody else was going to the KU football game, you would drive to Baker with him. And sometimes you'd get to do the color commentary, but a lot of times you'd be the spotter and, just point out who made the tackle, keep stats, things like that. And another job we had was to transcribe all the interviews that he was doing for his book. So, we got a sneak peek of that. And you know what's crazy about that, Brian, is now that I'm traveling nationally for my job in a completely different space, right, in soccer, how many times I've met a young aspiring broadcaster who has that book because they just Googled, books on sports play-by-play, and that's the first one that comes up. And you mentioned Bob Fesco. There's a picture of me, Bob Fesco. We were in the same class. Brian Seaman, who was one of my best friends in the journalism school, who is the play-by-play voice of the Los Angeles Clippers now and has done wonderfully in his career, and some other great guys. I don't want to leave all the other guys out. Brian Petrata, I think, is in that picture. With Bob Costas, because Bob Costas came to class and guest lectured one day, and we all got a picture, and that's in the book. So I've had people randomly go. In fact, and a funny thing, when I was doing the Sporting Kansas City games, the guy that was my color commentator broadcast partner for the last 2 or 3 years of my time at Sporting was a former Sporting player named Jacob Peterson. Had never had any interest in getting into broadcasting whatsoever. And I was kind of like, I talked him into it. I'm like, hey man, you'd be really good at this. Yeah. He was a great player, but he was one of those guys that didn't feel comfortable on a microphone at first and didn't really think it was something he'd want to do. So when he decided to do it, his mom bought him a book. Guess what book it was? And he called me up. He goes, dude, you're in this book. There's a picture of you. And, as a college kid, it's crazy thinking back to that. And now, so you're going to teach a class now.
Yes.
Tell me about this. I want to hear about this. And by the way, I'm fishing for a guest lecture appearance on your class.
Oh my gosh, you're already on the short list. Part of getting the gig was who can you bring in as a guest lecturer? I'm like, I think I can use a favor with Nate. But no, it's something that they went away from for a few years after Tom retired, and then they've had various forms of sportscasting instruction. But we've got a great journalism school still churning out tremendous talent, but they had a need for a specific play-by-play class. And they know that I office about, 50 paces away from the front doorstep of the journalism school. And I'm also a pretty easy yes. So it was an easy ask, and I'm looking forward to it. And yeah, we'll start with his curriculum, but something that's cool, there's a lot of great autobiographies right now of all of our favorite sportscasters, from Joe Buck to Jim Nantz and on down the line. And so we'll start with Tom's book, but then I'm going to have every student pick a sportscaster's autobiography. Maybe it's Vin Scully, could be anybody, Howard Cosell, and then do a report and a project to educate the rest of the class on this particular sportscaster. But as you know from Tom's class, the best part of any play-by-play class is the hands-on stuff and the coaching and the mentorship. And so Tom would always have us listen to everybody's tape in front of everybody, which when you're 18 years old and a little bit raw, that's kind of intimidating. Back then, to date you and I with our gray hair here, we would record games on a cassette deck. And I remember if your tape wasn't working or it didn't sound good, he'd kind of stop the tape and throw it back at you, not in a demeaning way, but when you're 18, a pretty intimidating way. So I haven't decided yet how much we'll listen to everybody's raw stuff in front of the whole class versus one-on-one, but there'll be a lot of hands-on coaching and play-by-play fundamental teaching where they do some examples of work, and then we work on it together each week in some capacity. So I'm looking forward to that too.
That's an interesting thought. And I vividly remember those sessions, because the class, at least when I was in the sportscasting class with him, was probably about 10 to 12 kids.
Yep.
So it wasn't a big 300 person classroom. I'll bet you're going to get more kids than that, because I was talking to Al Wallace, former sportscaster in Kansas City for a long time, who teaches in the journalism school now. And he was telling me that a class that he's doing about sports and broadcasting started with like 30, 40 kids, is up to over 200 kids now.
Amazing.
And
wow.
He's teaching it at one of the big auditoriums because there's so much demand for it. So your class is going to be popular. But to me, I'm thinking about it, and I remember those classes. I got a B- on every single play-by-play tape that I did for Tom. And he always would try to tell people when he would bring me back to guest lecture that I was one of his A students. I'm like, no, Tom, I was a B-. And it was always because my voice was too high. And he would just, and I think that Tom came from, especially in the old school broadcaster days, all the broadcasters had these big, deep voices. And so he actually helped me get voice lessons. I used to do voice lessons in school, and as you can tell, it didn't do a ton. It was like that. And then one guy said, you just need to start smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. And I wasn't willing. That's like the one thing in my career I wasn't willing to do to try to improve. But Tom still helped me, because I think he saw that I was willing to put the work in.
Totally.
He got me my first job in Moberly, Missouri, all that stuff. It's funny because 30 years almost later, I still remember vividly him sitting there, and he liked everything about my play-by-play, but he would knock me down to a B- because the voice just wasn't there. And I kept thinking, well, what am I supposed to do about that? And you're sitting in front of all your peers, right? Like you said. But I would say this: if you're going to do a job that is a public job, you have to have the courage to put your work out there, right?
Totally.
If you're an artist, if you're a singer, if you're a basketball player, if you're a play-by-play announcer, you're putting your work on display for the public. And some people are going to like it, and some people aren't. You and I both know that very well, right?
Totally.
Some people probably think you're the best play-by-play guy ever, and some people think, that you're the worst, and who's right? And sometimes it's your bosses, by the way. You got one boss that thinks you're great, and a guy that runs another television station thinks that guy's terrible, So you have to, I would tell the kids, you have to get comfortable with that feedback and you have to be brave enough to put yourself out there and put your work on display, and be okay with the fact that not everybody's going to love it.
It's a huge part of it. And the all-time greats that we look up to, they didn't grow up in a social media age where you had immediate feedback as soon as the game's over, staring back at you on a Twitter feed. But that's all a part of it nowadays too. But I'm looking forward to it. Obviously, we're going to get Tom back to talk to the kids, and I'm glad to hear that you'd be willing to as well. You were already on my curriculum. I just hadn't made a phone call yet because I figured.
Oh, I was fishing for it, baby. I love doing that. I think it's so fun to talk to, because you put yourself back in your shoes, right? And let's get it back to talking about you at that time, because you have dreams when you're a college kid. I don't know about you, but one of the things that really started to hit me as I got to college and listened to guest lecturers and apply for jobs, boy, this is going to be a lot harder than I thought to get somewhere, because there are only so many jobs out there. I mean, I was getting turned down for high school play-by-play jobs in small towns in Texas and all that. And it started to kind of like, I started to wonder a little bit, man, am I going to be able to do this? Did you have any moments like that? Did you have any like ideas once you got to college, like, man, this is actually tougher than I thought it was going to be, or tougher to get into?
For sure. I mean, you realize the level of competition and how sought after these positions are. I was really blessed throughout my entire career that I had key mentors at certain moments that opened doors for opportunities. And when I graduated from KU, because of some sales work I'd done on the students' radio station, KJHK, I had a job lined up at the local KU affiliate, KLWN, right out the gates. And that kept me from having to go too far from home. And then I was really fortunate from there to, over 10 years, get to work with guys like you and be around it with KU baseball and women's basketball, and filling in when I could on men's basketball, to develop a certain amount of rapport and relationships, not just with the KU people, but honestly doing a daily show, kind of like you're doing this podcast weekly, where you're talking with the who's who of KU for 10 years every day. It developed a Rolodex of great KU contacts, but also stories that were much deeper into the folklore of Kansas basketball, football, baseball, whatever, than a typical 25-year-old should have. But I was entrenched in it every day. And so as I aspired to be a KU storyteller and a preserver of these great Jayhawk legacies and memories, I had a chance to share the mic daily with guys like Scott Pollard and Bud Stallworth, who's on the wall behind me, if I duck my head right there, David Lawrence, Wayne Simeon, Aaron Miles, the list goes on, Todd Reesing. And I learned from these guys. And the best thing that I figured out at an early age was, and I would hope that any kid listening to this, no matter what their aspiration is, whether it's play-by-play, TV sportscaster, anchor, whatever, you know a lot at 22, but you don't know even 5% of what somebody else knows. And the best thing you can do at that point when you're young in your career is soak up all the great knowledge and history around you. And so on that show for 10 years doing Rock Chalk Sports Talk, I was more of a point guard, passing off, getting the great hot takes from this amazing group of co-hosts that I had a chance to learn from. And through that, at the end of those 10 years, even though I was only, 31 at the time, I'd had a chance to really jump into the deep end of the pool of KU history and soak up a lot that the typical 20 or 30-year-old wouldn't have. So I highly encourage folks, because I think we live now in a society where it's important to have the hot take and to be that talking head that has a big, bold opinion. And yes, those will get you noticed on TikTok and Instagram. But if you're humble enough to understand also what you don't know, and that it's okay to listen and learn and tap into the knowledge and history of those who have gone before you, that made me a more well-rounded and seasoned Kansas media historian. And it also made me a better storyteller and sportscaster as a result. So I'm forever grateful for those years. And like I said, you asked about, was it overwhelming or intimidating, the amount of competition in the industry? Absolutely. But I also learned at an early age that it's relationships and networking above all else that allows you to climb in this industry. No matter how deep your pipes are, as we talked about earlier, or how great your play-by-play sound is, it's all about networking and connections. And that's what opened the door for me to get the job at Texas Tech and ultimately come back home to KU 4 years later. So all about how you treat people, how you approach your day-to-day, the networking and the connections you make along the way, but also being humble enough to know that while you might have a decent skill set, there's always somebody that does it a little bit better or knows a little bit more. And it's okay to accept that, learn from it, and grow as a result of it. And I think those were probably some things that helped me early in my career a great deal.
You scroll, tap, swipe, text, call, and do a lot more on your phone. None of us can fathom life without all the world's knowledge in our pocket. We use phones for just about everything. But when it comes to doing the bigger things, like streaming, gaming, and working, you shouldn't be limited to just your phone screen or mobile plan. You see, millions of Americans don't have home internet. They're forced to do everything on their phone or through their mobile service via a hotspot. Or they go to public spaces and use unsecure Wi-Fi which can be problematic when dealing with personal or sensitive information. You deserve reliable home internet that fits your life and your budget. And right now, Internet Essentials Plus from Xfinity is free through the Affordable Connectivity Program. Get unlimited data and equipment included with no annual contract. Go to xfinity.com/free to see if you qualify. Restrictions apply. After program participation ends, Comcast standard charges, taxes, and fees apply. May not be combined with other offers.
I had this patient. His cancer treatment had him in the hospital for a while. One day, he was telling me about his grandson and how a big night was coming up for him. So we arranged to make it a big night for my patient too. I sometimes wonder if I'm doing all I can. Then I help make a moment like this possible, and I know I am.
I want to get to the decision to go down to Lubbock, Texas, because I think that was a really impressive and brave move. You know, we could talk about in a second, but let's reminisce a little bit about our time together.
Yeah.
Over those 8 years or whatever it was with KU women's basketball. Bonnie Henriksen was the coach at the time. She is an incredible lady. She just retired, by the way, from coaching this past year, and I've been staying in touch with her a little bit. You and I got to do a couple of Sweet 16s together.
Yes.
They made a trip all the way to the finals of the WNIT. We got to take some amazing road trips as well to some cool places. I'm curious maybe if there's a memory or two that stands out to you the most about that time and our careers together.
Man, so many great memories. And, you know, you're the perfect example of somebody that I tried to just soak up as much knowledge as I could from, in your style, your preparation, in the way you handled the relationship dynamic between an announcer and the coaching staff when we're out on the road. You know, we go to these dinners and Bonnie and her staff are always so inclusive of you and I, and to sit around and tell stories and develop that rapport. Because one thing that I also hope folks will listen up on for aspiring sportscasters, as good as you are on air and as great as your highlights sound, if you want to do this professionally in the big leagues or at the collegiate level, maybe as important as anything is the relationship and the trust the head coach has with his play-by-play announcer. And that's not just how good you sound on game day. That's the trust, the chemistry, the connection, the rapport you develop every day from going to practice, from, you know, being a good listener, asking good questions, always representing in a way that is positive and encouraging of the program, first and foremost, the leadership within that program, and ultimately the student athletes as well. And you were so good at setting an example of establishing that rapport with Coach Henriksen and her staff. And so, you know, at the end of it, we wind up with lifelong friendships with Bonnie and her great group of coaches because of those types of moments away from game day. And in making out that path toward great friendships and relationships, there was also tremendous trust established. And that's what ultimately gets people's jobs or costs you a job if a coach feels like he can't trust you. And so I learned that from you, how to cultivate those great relationships and that great trust factor. And I owe Bonnie a huge debt of gratitude too, because, you know, they brought me on to work with you in part because I was available and I was ambitious. But hey, man, I didn't know an ounce as much of basketball as some of the other color analysts like Brenda Van Langen or Patty Phillips did. But I was passionate. I was enthusiastic. I wanted to be a positive KU person. And I think they saw a little bit of Nate Bukaty in me, in a guy they could trust that would do it with a lot of Jayhawk enthusiasm. And so that helped me get the job. But those 8 years working with you, I mean, it was so influential, as I said, on so many levels. And I count my blessings every day that I had a chance to have a great friend in the industry who was also a mentor. We were only separated by 5 or 6 years in age, but man, you mentored me probably more than you realize in so many ways in those 8 seasons together.
Well, you mentioned something I think is a key thing too. Availability. You know, sometimes just, you know, being available and saying yes when you get the opportunities, you know, is a big key to getting somewhere as well. And that was certainly the case. I'm just thinking back to some of the fun trips we had, and getting to do the Sweet 16 game against that legendary Tennessee program in Iowa, in Des Moines, Iowa, is one that really stands out to me. That run and the game against Elena Deladon.
Yep.
It was was a heck of a game, wasn't it? I mean, those were some fun games.
And that was the memory I was going to share if we talked a specific game, because obviously we weren't expected to win that game. She was already, a budding icon. And ironically, I just ran into her in Vegas in the summertime. We were out there for Big 12 Football Media Day, and Team USA, men's and women's, were out there. And I ran into her, and we reminisced about that game, not in a rubbing in her face and reminder of losing kind of way, but in a, hey, this was a special moment early in my career, and I remember how awesome you were. And she could not have been more gracious. But I have a photo on my desk in Allen Fieldhouse of you, me, and Bonnie.
Yep.
And I somehow had procured the net, because they take the nets down. It's not that they were cutting the nets in the round of 32 to go to the Sweet 16, but they throw them away after the game. And I grabbed one, and I guess at the age of 28, I thought it was a good idea to put it on my head. So there's a picture of the three of us. And I just remember the joy and jubilation of winning that game when we weren't expected to. And, it's the beauty of March Madness, survive and advance. And every additional round is this unexpected surprise gift and experience and time with people you love. And so I've had that on my desk for 20 years, and I don't think I'll ever take it down. It's truly one of my all-time favorite moments.
I've got that picture framed in my house too. And it was actually, and it made me think about what you're talking about when you develop these relationships with the coaches. And I would say you could speak to this too. The people that you really become close with as well can be the equipment managers, the trainers, these people that are on the support staff that dedicate their entire lives to putting the student athletes in a position where they can be as successful as they possibly can. And I definitely gained a lot of appreciation for actually how much work student athletes put in. Like it's a job. They're doing full-time job type work because they're trying to compete at the highest level and they're being pushed. But the people that support them, when you're the trainer, you're the trainer for the whole team, so you don't get time off. And my point to that is, you and I both as KU fans, as kids, you're invested in wanting the team to win because you're rooting for them. Once you're in the position that you're in right now, for example, you've got a personal relationship with all these people that have invested so much of their time and energy away from their families and all these things. I don't know about you, but I ended up finding myself wanting the team to win for them more than even my fandom or anything, because it's like you care about these people and that their livelihoods are on the line with this stuff.
Absolutely. And, that access to see how much they pour in on a daily basis and to form those relationships with every aspect of the program is part of why I love what those of us that choose the play-by-play path get a chance to do. People ask all the time, is college play-by-play and being the voice of a specific school or team the end-all be-all, or why wouldn't you want to go do national games and that kind of thing? And I get a chance to do, 1 or 2 games a year on a bigger scope. But to me, the best part of this is the access behind the scenes and the relationships being a part of it. When we win, we get rings. I wish I had mine on today. When we travel on the team bus, team plane, and that access is so cool because, as I love to describe, I think in play-by-play, in sportscasting, you have 2 types of announcers, has-beens and never-wases. Well, I'm a never was. And I work with a couple of has-beens in Greg Gurley and David Lawrence, but they're the best has-beens you can work with. The point is, for guys like me that never played at a high level, this is the good stuff, right? Like traveling on the team plane, having access to the pregame meal where they're going over the scouting report and they're breaking it down, and you're a fly on the wall in the back of the room just taking it all in. And I try to never take that for granted. And I know you probably ask about my journey to Texas Tech in a little bit, but one story I like to tell is when you go to a place like Tech where when we had great years there, don't get me wrong. We made it to an NCAA tournament for men's basketball, went to 2 College World Series in baseball, but wins on the road were a big deal. Flying home on those victorious plane rides after winning in Waco or Norman or something like that was a big deal. And I'll never forget my first year as voice of the Jayhawks. We come back, we win at Kentucky, and I'm getting on the bus after the game, and I'm getting set to dap everybody up, walking down the line, just all fired up with my chest puffed out because we just won at Rupp Arena, man. And it was such a business-like, why is this guy so excited? And don't get me wrong, they had plenty of celebrations in the locker room before that. But by the time they got on the bus, it was like, hey, we're Kansas. This is what we
Yeah.
do, But the point is to have access to that type of stuff. I wouldn't trade that for anything. And to have a chance to connect with a fan base over the course of a career where you really carve out relationships, not just within the Jayhawk community and Lawrence, but all across the state. That's the stuff you miss out on if you're a national announcer where you're flying to a different city every week. You may have great rapport with the head coaches that you meet with for 15 or 20 minutes each week, twice a year, but you don't have a chance to carve out the relationships like you were talking about with the trainer or, the assistant coaches or whatever. You don't see the day-to-day. You don't get to stand on the sidelines of a Lance Leipold practice Monday through Wednesday, 2 hours a day, and learn why he's so great. You get that access if you're the voice of a particular team or a school. And to me, that's one of the most rewarding parts of it, because as a never was, I'm finally getting to have the exposure to what I grew up cheering for and thinking was so cool. And so I soaked that up even in year 9 here and year 21 overall, because to me, that's one of the best parts of this gig and biggest blessings throughout.
Man, you're speaking to my heart here, because now that I'm doing these games, I'm doing exactly what you just described for Major League Soccer, where I'm in a different town every weekend. You might see the same coach a few times through the course of the year. They set you up on a Zoom call 2 days before the game. And, we talk like this for 15 minutes, which is not the same as having dinner with somebody and sitting down face to face. And I always say, the positive thing is I haven't broadcasted a loss in 2 years, because I get to focus on whichever team wins and celebrate, how great their performance was. But the flip side, and by the way, the part you didn't describe is the part where when you're on a 5-game losing streak and you got to get on that bus. And, you and I have had those types of moments too. My first year with the Kansas women's basketball team, they didn't win a single game in conference play. It was an offer. And, I learned real quick also, for people like you and I that are talkers, this can be tough, but I learned real quick when to just put your head down and go to the back of the bus and don't say anything to anybody. Nobody wants to hear from you right now. And so I don't have to deal with that part now, right? Like the devastating loss, I get to celebrate the team that won, but I'm not a part of it. And that's what you're talking about, is when you're in your shoes, you're a part of this. I remember running into you in the celebration after the Jayhawks won the national championship down in New Orleans, which, dude, how incredible. You in 9 years, you've already had a national championship is unbelievable. But like you said, you get a ring. You're part of it, as opposed to if you're the national broadcaster, you called the moment and then you're on to the next thing. You don't get to share in it with the whole crew the way that you and Gurley and David Lawrence did after that game was over.
It really is probably the best part of it. I always say the relationships and then the front row seat at Allen Fieldhouse are the best 2 perks of the job. But having that inclusiveness, and that's the way it is at most schools, but I'd like to think that the way our Kansas coaches treat us and include us is also just a little bit better than what else is out there. And having been to some other places, you get a little more perspective on that. But they do treat you so well, and through that, you do get a chance to live the dream of being a part of the team. We're not in the tightest of tight huddles. Right. There's still moments where it's separate from the radio guys or whatever. But by and large, they do include us. And that's why this is the path for me. But for others, including yourself, that are gifted enough to do it on a national level, there's a lot of great rewards to that too. And I'm so excited when I watch your success and I see the, hundreds of thousands that are watching your calls, millions in some cases worldwide. That's a big deal. And obviously there's a lot of great perks that come through that too. So there's paths for all of us. We just have to find what our niche is. And I happen to love what I get to do here, and the connectivity, not just within the athletic department, but within the fan base, and trying to do things, in the Kansas community philanthropically is also something that you get a chance to do if your boots are planted in one place. And so that's through the Roundball Classic and the KU Cancer Fighter dedications and stuff like that. It'd be harder to do those things if I was speaking to a different fan base every week, but I get to really invest in this one, and they get to, pour back into me. And to me, that's also as fulfilling and rewarding of a part of this as anything.
And no doubt, sometimes the path kind of gets chosen for you too. You know, things nudge you in certain directions. You have a little bit of control, but there's a higher power, I think, that has some control over a lot of it too. Okay, so the choice to go to Texas Tech. the guy I referenced earlier, Jacob Peterson, that I worked with for a long time, taught me a phrase: courage over comfort.
Yeah.
You had to have been comfortable in Lawrence. I mean, you're basically home. You're doing, as you mentioned, you're doing your alma mater. You develop friendships with the most famous athletes and people in the athletics department and all that. And you leave to go to Lubbock, Texas. Was that a courage over comfort type of choice? Tell me about what that was like. Take me back to the decision to make that move.
I would say accepting a job that paid $11,000 and was in a town where you knew 3 people was probably a courage move for sure. But I had obviously enjoyed my time at Kansas. Ultimately, whether it took me back to KU or put me on a different path to getting my own men's play-by-play job, I was comfortable with whatever. But they had told me at KU, hey, we really like it. You're busting your tail. But realistically, as the guy that's filling in for Bob from time to time and working with Nate and doing baseball and all that, it would be harder to hire me in a full-time capacity if I was an understudy or an assistant too. Whereas if I go out and get my own job somewhere else, it would be a lot easier to one day, be in consideration, whether it was the Kansas job or a major conference college job, which I always told you was the dream. I mean, obviously to be at my alma mater is the number one dream of all dreams. But as you said, a lot of things have to fall into place, including the year in which you were born, the era. You get guys that are locked into these jobs for 40 years or 60 in Max's case, and it's really hard. Sometimes you're just born into the wrong era. But they encouraged me that I was doing all the right things, but realistically needed to go out and get my own men's job. And for those that hear that and think that might be chauvinistic or something, no, it was just the path in collegiate play-by-play. If you want to do football and the highest of eyeballs and ears listening, men's basketball, they probably weren't going to hire somebody that was just doing Olympic sports at that time. And so I had chances to go other places. I turned down a job at the College of Charleston because it just wasn't the right fit. But again, going back to what we talked about with networking earlier, it's all about who you know and the timing. And sometimes just through carving out a friendship with somebody and showing them, revealing yourself to them as being who they thought was a pretty good guy, who had a good head on his shoulders and a good heart, sometimes that can open doors in ways you never realize. And there was a guy who was doing Texas Tech play-by-play at the time named Mark Finkner, and we had bonded over a shared love of sports, but also a shared faith. And every year when he would come to town for basketball or baseball, we'd go out and break bread together and hang out. And one particular night, he told me, hey, man, this is weighing heavy on me, but I'm going to step away from the Texas Tech play-by-play job because I need to spend more time with my family. And I've been thinking about this, and God's put it on my heart that I need to give you the first crack at it. And it's not that he was the decision maker at all, but he gave me a window to get my resume and my tape in order so that I would have a strong run at it as soon as it was announced that it was open in public. And that all came from a friendship of just, bonding, like I said, over being likable guys and having a shared faith. And anyways, as fate or fortune would have it, you and I were scheduled to go to Lubbock 3 days later, and he was going to resign on a Wednesday, and we were calling a game in Lubbock on a Tuesday. So on our off morning before practice that day, game day shoot around, I went over to a Texas Tech fan store. I bought a big foam Guns Up Texas Tech finger, a Tech basketball shirt. And I went around campus and I took pictures of me, and it sounds kind of goofy, but embodying the Texas Tech sports culture. Took a picture by the Will Rogers statue, which famously, for folks that don't know this, the back end of the horse is pointed at the exact latitude and longitude angle to be downwind toward College Station, Texas. I love that tidbit, but they wanted to make sure the horse's glutes were pointed at the Aggies. I love that. Point is, took pictures all around campus. If you wanted a KU example, it would be like taking a picture by the Fog Island statue and then going over to the booth, right? And then I put together a Texas Tech specific demo tape with me calling play-by-play of their team next year, including their recruits that were coming in, and did this, new era, new voice type angle. But I wanted to show them that even though I wasn't from there, and even though I didn't have the Texas Tech graduated ring, that I could entrench myself in their traditions and their culture and be a fit. And as luck would have it, or blessing would have it, between those efforts and having Bill Self call Billy Gillespie and having Danny Manning call the head of the Texas Tech network, it ended up playing in my favor and I got that job. But it all went back to having that relationship. And that's why I tell students or anybody willing to listen that it's not just your time on the mic over the airwaves that sets your destiny or your path within this industry. Every time you step foot out of your house and you're interacting with somebody, the way you treat people, the attitude of gratitude you have, the way you handle adversity when things don't go well, they're always watching, always listening, whether it's on air or not. And I didn't know when I was going to lunches or dinners with Mark Finkner all those years that it was going to open the door later in life, but that's exactly what it did. And so I encourage people all the time that every interaction you have, whether it's into a microphone or not, is paving the way or slamming a door on what your future could be. So be mindful of that in the way you treat people and the way you handle things, because they're always watching and listening, and you may not realize it, but you're carving a path whether you choose to or not.
And whether you think the person you're interacting with is up here or down here, right, or above your station in life or below your station in life, whether you think that person can help you right now or not, you want to treat everybody the right way. Just trust me, because you never know what relation. You should, just to be a good person, but people that some days, somebody that's an intern for you today could be your boss tomorrow or looking to hire somebody. So those are great lessons to learn. Okay. I want to talk, you referenced something I really want to make sure we get to before we run out of time. And one of my favorite things about you is the investment in the community and the charitable work that you do. The Roundball Classic has been an incredible thing. You did that even while you were at Texas Tech back in Lawrence, Kansas. I've texted you about this personally, but when you have your cancer honoree, I want to make sure I use the proper phrasing here. How do you phrase what you do for each game?
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. It's the KU Cancer Fighter dedications. And we've done those for 5.5 years now. But yes, thank you. You can continue with the question, but that's how
I'm going to be attending a funeral, unfortunately, here in a couple of days for a man named Claude Aldridge, whose daughter was the maid of honor at my wedding. And unfortunately, he just passed away. But just a week or two ago before that, he was your cancer fighter, and he was a diehard Kansas fan. His entire family is big Jayhawks. And I know from speaking to some of them what that moment meant for them. And you and I both have been involved in cancer-related causes. And I think that one of the things that I've really come to appreciate with what the types of things like what you're doing is that a person and a family are going through a really, really dark time. And during those dark times, you need rays of light in your life. And those little rays of light, like if the sky is as black as it could possibly be, like being out in the country in Ark City, Kansas, where I spent part of my childhood, I remember how bright the stars were out there. A little ray of light is actually really bright in a dark room. And so those moments give people something positive to hold on to and positive to remember, instead of just the darkness and pain. And you can't put a price on that. And so I want to, first of all, commend you for all the work you've done for that. But I'd love to hear you talk about why that became something that was passionate for you and how you developed these programs.
Man, thank you for saying all of that. I couldn't agree more. We don't offer a cure or a way out necessarily, but that little glimmer of light and reminder that you're not alone in this, and you got a lot of people pulling for you and loving on you and praying for you, hopefully provide some hope in the darkness. But to try to be succinct about it, the Roundball Classic, we started 17 years ago. And by the way, I commend you for your awesome work with the Big Steps organization that had a profound impact in a huge philanthropic way in our area, particularly in Kansas City and around surrounding parts. But Roundball got started because I was 25 or 26 and I was doing the KLWN job and I was enjoying it, but it sounds kind of morbid, but I had the thought, man, if I get hit by a truck tomorrow and I'm done, what was my legacy? What impact did I really make? And I'm just the guy that gives you the sports scores in the morning on your drive to work and entertains you on the ride home on the afternoon drive. And that's it. And I read a book called Roaring Lambs, which is a Christian-based book, but it talks about how God elevates people to positions of influence within the secular realm to have a profound impact within their world even if it's not full-time in ministry or full-time in whatever. And so it challenges you to look at, what are my spheres of influence? What are my resources? Who are my contacts? How do I utilize that circle of influence and bear fruit from it and impact lives from it? And I realized at the time, well, I got this Rolodex of a lot of KU contacts. I got a platform of a radio show that people listen to, and we could advertise some things through in terms of good works and making momentum to help people in need. What could we do with this? And we brainstormed the idea of a celebrity charity basketball game. And there was a local need that I had a phone call from a guy that was a pastor in town that said, man, we really need to raise money for my son-in-law. He's a youth pastor. He's battling cancer. He's already had his leg amputated. It's metastasized into his chest. We don't know how much time he has left, but he's got a wife and he's got a kid, and the medical bills are mounting and the pressure is daunting. How do we help him? And so that's where I got to thinking, well, man, I could round up about 20 basketball players and we could pack a high school gym and sell $5 tickets and $1 hot dogs and maybe try to make an impact. And, through that, Brandon White was our first beneficiary. Sadly, he passed away later that summer. But because his fight was cancer and his passion was working with kids, we made it about pediatric cancer going forward. And it's been amazing to see the way God's blessed this event over the last 17 years and growing it bigger and bigger every year, not just with the names that come back, but families that are beneficiaries a lot of times end up rolling up their sleeves and jumping in and pitching in to help in future years. And so our board has grown in size, our impact, our scope is bigger that is. And we're blessed to say we've raised 1.9 million in the last 17 years. We've had a chance to impact over 150 families. Now we have a year-round benevolence fund in addition to the children that we pick, where there are 20 instances of KU football, men's and women's basketball, baseball and softball games where a kid and his parents get to come to the game. They get a tour of the facilities, and at the end of the night, they get a $5,000 check. And unless they're watching this podcast, they don't know that they're getting that. They just think they're coming to the game. And so at the end of the tour, they get presented with the check, and it's a pretty cool deal. But that's been the most rewarding, fulfilling thing in my career. And the KU Cancer Fighter dedications, real quickly, we started those, like I said, over 5 years ago now, in part because I felt like, well, we're making an impact in some hands-on philanthropic things, but hey, man, we crack that mic open 3 to 4 times a week between the Hawk Talks and the games. And what's a little something we could do, even in 30 seconds, to provide that light that you're talking about? I feel like we're wasting an opportunity if we don't at least squeeze something in there. And in some regards, it sounds funny, but the Bob Barker Price is Right, have your pet spayed or neutered sign off at the end of his shows was a little bit of an inspiration. How do we squeeze in something in the last 30 seconds? And because I'd had so many inspiring folks come into my life through the Roundball Classic that were battling cancer, and because that's a disease that sadly affects all of us, whether it's family, friends, whatever, coworkers, we thought maybe this could be something that folks would be, encouraged by, and there would be enough folks we could reach and hopefully bless through this, that, there'd be real profound impact made. I never would have thought we'd do it as many times as we have and it'd take off the way it has. But I'm really fortunate to get a chance to meet people like Claude and like so many others that, tell us that shout out and the social media and the love they felt, hearing from people that heard it or saw it, meant a great deal in the midst of their fight. That certainly is fulfilling, maybe as much as anything we do. So thank you for bringing that up. And if anybody watching this knows somebody that right now is in the middle of the fight, whether it's pediatric cancer or somebody late in life that just had this crop up, man, we'd love to give them a little bit of encouragement and spread the love. So email me, bhanni, I spell it funny, HANNI @ku.edu. All I ask for is their name, their town, their diagnosis, their favorite Jayhawk of all time, and then anything else about them that you'd want me to know. This guy's a father of 3 and he's a loving husband and he worked his whole life doing X, Y, or Z. We try to weave that into the story too. But and then if you have a picture of them in Jayhawk gear, we love that as well. But thank you for the chance to talk about that. It's certainly something that we're really honored to get to do and tell these stories, and hope that so long as the disease is still out there and we haven't found a cure, that we're able to use our platform to inspire those in the midst of fighting it. And hopefully, eventually, one of these days, we'll have to move on to a different inspiring message because we did find a cure. But in the meantime, maybe that little bit of light can indeed help some Jayhawk fans across Jayhawk Nation.
It's amazing stuff. All right, before we sign off, Brian, let's have a little fun here because you just mentioned you have people say your favorite Jayhawk of all time. Who's your favorite Jayhawk of all time?
Man, great question. Gosh dang. And that's put me on the spot.
Yeah.
It's funny. As a kid, I loved watching Jacques Vaughn and Billy Thomas. And then you get into this career, and all of a sudden your favorites aren't the guys that were the most heroic on the floor. They're the guys that are really genuine, good people away from the sport, and you connect with because they don't have the huge ego, the head that's so big they can't walk through the door, but they're down to earth and they're good dudes or gals. And in this case, in getting to do this for 9 years, there's probably one student athlete whose heart and relatability and just down to earth nature was just as big as his superstar skill set. And for me, that's Devonte Graham. And obviously, you see the $1 million smile and the infectious personality that everybody's drawn to. But let me tell you, this is a really good human being away from all of that. When the cameras aren't rolling and, we're not doing something on stage or on camera, and I ask him, hey, Devonte, we got a kid in the Roundball Classic organization that's about to go into his first round of chemo, and he's really scared. Would you send me a 30-second video to pump him up before he goes in? Nate, I got it back within an hour. And I do that repeatedly with him. And there's other guys too, Cole Aldrich, Ben McLemore. They've done very similar things. But Devontae's probably my favorite because as great of a kid as he was and a young man to cover at Kansas and watch hit three-pointer after three-pointer, he's just as good of a person, has just as sweet of a heart. I think that goes to being raised by great women in his life, his mother and his grandmother. And I've got some great ones in that regard too. But I love him. So that's my answer if you had to pin me down to one. But, man, as you know, doing this for as long as you have, you develop so many favorites over the years. It's like trying to pick your favorite kid, right?
I was speaking at the journalism school last year. I believe his sister's in school at KU.
Yeah,
school,
absolutely. She worked in the men's basketball office for a couple of years, as a matter of fact.
Well, that's a great shout. And I would say that his game at Oklahoma was one of the top 10 performances possibly in KU basketball history when you think about who he guarded and what he did in that game. If young people that maybe, I don't know if that's too long ago to reference for people to remember, but go back and watch what he did in that game. Maybe most underrated, like, is there a low-key player that for whatever reason, when you were a kid or whatever, that you just loved him as a player that people would say, oh, I forgot about him, or, like a low-key favorite player?
Low-key favorite player. Man,
I'll give you mine as an example. My favorite player of all time was Richard Scott.
Okay, sure.
He was on the 91 and 93 teams that went to the Final Four under Roy Williams. He was a low post player, a little bit in the KJ, not as explosive as KJ and everything, but in terms of like being a low post player that was less than 6'8", he's probably 6'4", 6'5", but he would post up 7-footers and score. And he played so much bigger than he was. So that's my low key favorite player of all time.
Man, I love that. That's a great example. I was always drawn to the walk-ons, and Greg Gurley makes fun of me to this day. It's probably because I identify more with them. You and I can relate to that, right? We weren't blessed to be like 6'8" with the big biceps and the leaping ability and all that. So to me, when I would go to these games with my dad and there'd be 4 minutes to go, and back then, there wasn't nearly the parity in college basketball you have today. Back then, we were always up 30, right? And so fans are like filing out because they got to get to their cars in time to hear the Roy Williams post-game interview with Max. And my dad would want to leave to get a jump on traffic, but I wanted to stay and watch the walk-ons. And so these will be random names that a lot of your listeners may or may not get, but guys like Lane Shaplinsky, and remember TJ Watley's mustache? TJ
Watley had the mustache, man.
Oh my gosh. And then I know you know this one because we're friends with him too, but Terry Nooner. Yeah. Terry Nooner. I love Terry Nooner. I love the walk-ons. For me, the last 4 minutes watching them get mop-up duty, because it was the personification and fulfillment of every Kansas kid's dream. We all shoot on our driveways, simulating Mario Chalmers 3 or whatever big moment you're trying to recreate, dreaming that one day we could wear that jersey. And so I guess I saw myself in the walk-ons. And so now as we get further in life and you got Patrick Cassidy representing Columbus, Kansas, and you got all these small town Kansas kids that make their way onto the team, those were the low-key favorites of mine that I'll always remember, even if they don't stand anywhere close to the tops of the list of KU stat leaders all time.
This is the lamest bragging point ever, but I scored 11 points against Terry Nooner in high school.
Did you?
And the only reason I know that is because he was on the staff at the KU women for a time when we were there, and we were talking about our high school careers. And he was like, wait a second, we played against you guys. And his mom had kept every box score from his high school career. And he sent me a picture of the box score. His team won, by the way. Lincoln Prep at the times where he was. His team won, but I scored 11.
How many did he score?
A lot more than me, I'm sure. It's sad when you brag about going for 11 points. But that was a Division I player at Kansas basketball, and he a great guy, by the way, Terry Nooner as well. All right, one more for you. Who's the best football player you've ever seen at the University of Kansas?
Wow. Best football player ever at the University of Kansas. With my two eyes, man, that's a great question because obviously we're coming off the Devin Neal era, and he embodies all those attributes that I just talked about away from the sport while also being excellent on the field. And he just eclipsed June Hinley's rushing record that stood for almost 30 years. I think about guys like Kerry Meyer that were brought in to play one position, quarterback, and wind up rewriting the record books at a different position and selflessly, humbly accepted a different role because it was what was best for the good of the team. I think about electrifying athletes that come to mind, and this is a name that unfortunately will never live in the same regard because he didn't finish here, but Puka Magic was pretty exciting to watch. That was one of the most dynamic athletes ever with Puka Williams, but he's not in the best ever category that I saw at KU. Man, you and I both covered Aqib Talib, Chris Harris. It's been neat to see them go on and go to 5 and 4 Pro Bowls respectively. But to me, the guy that got Kansas football to a level of not just respectability and week in, week out competitiveness, but actually national prominence. And he didn't look the part, but man, did he deliver. And he has numbers that nobody will ever touch. And if I turn the camera around in my messy office, that's him right there.
Number
T.O.
5.
Double trouble, Todd Reesing. 90 touchdowns. Are you kidding me? Yeah, taking us to 20 wins over the course of a 2-year stretch. He may not look like the most impressive football player ever as he stands in at 5'10" on a good day with his shoes on. But, man, this guy had a playmaking ability, and he could just flip the switch and turn it on better than anybody I've ever been around. So, and he also had the type of personality that drawed people to him, and they wanted to play for this guy. So I have to go with Reesing, but man, I could list off a laundry list of great names, no doubt.
I think Reesing would be the answer for most people. I think you're given because at the quarterback position, certainly rightfully so. For me, Aqib Talib. And I just look at it like when we look at Travis Hunter right now and what he's doing, Aqib Talib was doing, he might not have put the same type of numbers offensively, but when they put him in on offense, he scored touchdowns. When he made so many plays, and that's when I was the sideline reporter for the team. And I feel like that's one job that I really enjoyed because when you're on the field and you see the athleticism, of players. And at college, there's a wider gap. When you get to the NFL, everybody is a phenomenal athlete. He was an all-pro even at that level, which goes to show you how good he was. But there are certain guys when you watch a college game where you're like, oh, that guy's on a different level than everybody else on the field. And there was an interception return he had in a game where I'm trying to remember what team it was, but it was a non-conference game. But he intercepted a pass on the northeast corner of the end zone and returned it all the way to the southwest corner of the other end zone and did a flip into the end zone on the, as the last final moment after he had zigged and zagged his way through the entire field. And I just, I think that for me, when I look at it from that standpoint, just in terms of just football player, obviously like what Todd Reesing did was the most important part of that entire team that went to back-to-back bowl games and won the Orange Bowl. He was the most important player. But for me, overall football player, just if you needed to design a player, right. Talib was he was incredible. And I hope that people remember how good he was, but anyway, so that's kind of a fun debate you can have. All right. Last one for you. Take the national championship out of the picture. Best moment
Yeah.
that you've been on the mic for? Like the thing that like is the most exciting moment, or a moment that just stands out to you the most in your 9 years so far?
Man, great question. Obviously, the title game would be the easy answer. Getting to share the hug with Ochai right after and Greg, it was such an amazing moment I'll never forget. But yeah, if you take that one out, it comes down to two things for me. The football win at Texas with the Jared Casey catch on the 2-point conversion,
Yeah, I love that.
56, we win, because that was, the launch pad moment of
Yeah.
upward trajectory of Kansas football. And what's funny about that game is we almost didn't get there to call it. We had basketball the day before on a Friday night, and then David Lawrence and I had a commercial flight on an airline that shall not be named that was supposed to get out at 8 a.m., was canceled 3 times, and we're panicking, trying to find other flights. We got to the stadium literally as Brandon McAnderson was taking the airwaves for the Crimson and Blue show 10 hours later. So thank God we made it, or we would have missed the greatest call ever. But that was so cool, just because you saw us, a David versus Goliath story, rise up and realize, hey, we can hang with these guys, and we got the right man at the top of our program to put us on a path to being in every game. That's the first one. And then if I had to pick up a basketball one that wasn't the national championship game, 2 come to mind. My first year, I got to call the West Virginia game where we were down 14 with 2:43 to go, and everybody was leaving, not because they wanted to get to the radio to hear the post-game interview, but because they thought it was over. And Dick Vitale was talking about, they're leaving, baby. They're leaving the field house. What's going on? And Devontae Graham leads us back. And I remember watching the effect of Allen Fieldhouse when that building gets rocking. It's an overwhelming, intimidating thing. West Virginia had a player named Nathan Adrian. And in the midst of this furious comeback, this Morgantown native, Nathan Adrian, is standing trying to throw the ball in, and the decibels were past 130. And he's just, you can see his knees physically shake because he's so overcome and overwhelmed by the moment and the atmosphere and everything. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5-second call, didn't get it in, turnover, Kansas ball. We get it, we score, we win. It was unbelievable. And I remember thinking in that moment, in this building, anything is possible. With Bill Self on the sidelines, 95% home court winning percentage, by the way. With this fan base, this building, anything is possible. And that was my first year on the call. I just thought, man, how lucky are we to do games here? But the other basketball memory in 10 seconds or less, Elite Eight, Kansas, Duke, Omaha, 1 seed versus 2 seed. We win in overtime. Malik Newman, Sviatoslav Mikhailuk, Devontae, all those guys. That was the greatest 3-point shooting team in Kansas history, and we hit some huge shots in that one. And Grayson Allen had a ball that hung up on the rim at the end of regulation for what felt like an eternity. I described it as like an egg on an equinox that was just sitting there, hanging there, and it could go either one direction and we lose or one direction and we get overtime. Thank God we got an extra 5 minutes, and as you all know, Kansas went on to win it and go to yet another Final Four, which I still recognize them going to in 2018.
Well, hey, Brian, I mean, man, it's been a heck of a run for 9 years. This has been really fun catching up with you. Congratulations on everything. I'm going to hold you to that, letting me come talk to your class.
Yeah.
You know, I love doing that stuff. I want to do it. I'm fishing for it. And I want to say this. We'll go ahead and call this the President Hotel on the Jayhawker podcast, sponsoring the Call of the Game. Okay, so the Call of the Game is presented by the President Hotel, and I'm just going to let everybody know that is the place to be when it comes to getting ready for the Big 12 tournament, the Big 12 championship, whatever it is that you want to do downtown. It is the place to be. Over 200 rooms and suites to choose from. Call 816-221-9490 or online at presidentkansascity.hilton.com. Brian, thanks for the time, man. This was fun. Let's do it again soon, okay?
Hey, love you, brother. Thank you for all you did for me in my career, the friendship we've enjoyed for 25 years now. And like I said at the top, I'm so proud of you. When I get to say my guy that we used to do women's basketball together is now doing broadcast scene worldwide, there's so much pride. And when I watch your timeline of the different city you're in each week and the amazing stadiums you're calling games in, there's so much pride and joy to see that dream come true for you, while also gratitude that you've helped me along the way in chasing my own dreams. So thank you, buddy. You're as good a guy as they come in this industry, and I'm so grateful that we had a chance to start out a friendship all those years ago that carries on as strong as ever to this day. Love you, buddy.
Living the dream, man. That's Brian Hanni. Good man. Voice of the Kansas Jayhawks. This has been the Jayhawker podcast. We'll see you next time.